everything they read that said that the CIO had really changed in the last few years from being a fairly sleepy, cautious risk mitigation unit and had become much more aggressive, much more risk tolerant, and profitable. And it was your intention that it become a profit center, and in fact, more than a quarter of JPMC's profits for 2010 came from CIO's trading. But there was a question that Senator Johnson asked you from that article about that there had been a limit that traders had to liquidate, had to get out of any position that had lost $20 million, and you were very puzzled by that and said you knew nothing about it. Have you inquired since then if there was such a limit and it was changed?
No.
You have not asked within your organization?
I think it was referred to something back in 07 or 08, so I did not ask, no.
All right. You did say last week that the failure with these trades was not that it was rogue traders. They weren't violating the risk controls. The risk control that were not sufficient. That is correct, right?
They were too low. They were too high. They should have been much more lower limits that they had, yes.
Well, did they have any limits? Last week you seemed to indicate not.
No, the CIO as a total had limits, but this unit didn't have its own, but they used the CIO's limits, which they eventually helped hit, which stopped it at this level of loss, yeah.
But a limit of $20 million in losses and then you close the position, that would be a fairly granular risk control, wouldn't it?
If that were true, it depends what the area is, but yes.
All right, and you have been very critical of JPMC in this matter, and you said that it was a significant risk management failure, said it was flawed, complex, poorly reviewed, poorly executed, poorly managed. But on February 29, you filed a certification required by law that you had adequate risk controls in place, that management's assessment, the firms determined that there were no material weaknesses in its internal controls over financial reporting as of December 31, 2011. I know that you're entitled to rely upon your subordinates, and I'm sure you relied upon your subordinates in making that certification, but was that certification correct?
I believe it to be, yes.
It was correct?
It was to my knowledge at the time, and we're...
Well, no. Not based upon your knowledge of the time, but based upon what you know now. Was that certification correct?
That's why we're having a review, to make sure that we've got all the right things in place. That's what companies do when they have problems. They analyze them, they review them, and they make determinations like that, and the review's not done yet.
All right. Who is entitled to, I mean, it seems like that certification is intended for regulators. It's also intended for investors, isn't it? Aren't they entitled to rely upon the representation that there are adequate risk controls?
I don't know the thing you have in front of you, but...
What's that?
I don't know what you're referring to, but we try to give proper disclosures to our investors.
Well, I'm referring actually to the certification about risk controls.
Yeah.
The certification is required by law, and presumably it's for both regulators and also for investors, isn't it?
Yeah, we try to disclose what we're supposed to disclose.
All right. What inquiry did you make about risk controls at CIO before you signed that certification?
I believed at that time that the risk controls in CIO were properly being done. That they were properly being done.
You were surprised last week at the question about the $20 million limit. It appeared to be something you were hearing for the first time, and you haven't inquired in the 6 days since then whether that was true. I know that you're entitled to rely upon your subordinates. You said that last week. But it seems like there must be a limitation on that entitlement if you have noticed that there may be something wrong. And one of the ways that you might get other information would be from the financial press. Did you read the Bloomberg article?
I don't remember I read the Bloomberg article. Well,
it was an article that said there was a $100 million limitation that traders at the CIO had to close positions once they'd lost $20 million, and that would seem like that would stick out as a pretty big deal.
It wouldn't stick out to me. It happened many years ago. I would pay virtually no attention to it. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Miller, your time has expired. Mr. Stivers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being here today, Mr. Dimon. Before you were seated, we had a first panel where we had 5 regulators, and the 2 things that really struck me out of that panel were something Mr. Alvarez from the Federal Reserve said about capital. Obviously, that's a theme we've had here today about how capital, your strong capital position saved this from causing JPMorgan to have a big problem and ensures that it won't cause the rest of the system a problem. The other thing was Mr. Gruenberg from the FDIC talked about risk management. That's your questions that you got from Mr. Grimm and Ms. Hayworth centered around risk management. Is there anything in your internal review other than capital and risk management that have come out that are lessons learned that other institutions should know?
Well, I think you've all brought up some things a little bit about models and implementation of models, making sure risk committees are independent-minded, not just sitting around having a cup of coffee, all those kind of things. So there'll be more than just that. But
yes, sir. And Mr. Frank talked a little bit about smart regulation that you'd referred to earlier. We had those 5 regulators sitting in the seats before you. Not one of them really is in charge of the others. They don't really coordinate. There were a lot of questions about how they share communication. In fact, no questions came up from any of the previous panel about harmonizing the regulations between Europe that they passed in on March 29th with the U.S. regulations, and there don't appear to be any lessons learned that are shared with other firms after what you go through to make sure that there's real shared knowledge. Do you want to comment any more about what smart regulation means to you?
So when Dodd-Frank was done, one of the things it had was the FSOC, like an oversight committee to make sure no gaps in the system and that learnings are shared, and we kind of supported that, but it was set up with, I say, virtually no teeth. And the legislators would have to change it, but someone should tell who's responsible for mortgages, who's responsible for Volcker, as opposed to 5 people that have jurisdiction. You see how complex it gets, how long it takes to work it out with foreign regulators. So I think simplifying it, clarifying it, adjudicating disputes, and giving authority and responsibility to the same people would be a good thing.
Do you want to comment a little bit about how the impact on a multinational financial firm like yourself with regulations in Europe and regulations here that are not harmonized?
Yeah, well, so we talk about Dodd-Frank, which has 400 rules. We have to accommodate Basel, which has hundreds of different things we have to do. We're not against them all, but liquidity, capital, et cetera. But the rules come in out of Brussels, FSA, which is in the UK, and several others. So, and CFTC, SEC. So we have to deal with a lot, and we're going to. I just wish it was a little bit more coordinated, and we dealt with the important ones first, and not just treat everyone like they're all the same, like they're equally important. Yeah. To a hammer, everything's a nail, and that's what we're kind of doing.
And some questions have come up earlier today, and I'm going to make a statement instead of asking you this, but there have been a lot of questions about too big to fail, and I'll just say as a policymaker, too big to fail only happens when policymakers let it happen. So I'm not asking you to comment on that, but that's a fact. I do want to talk to you about the Volcker rule a little bit. You've had some questions about it before, but it really, the key thing on the Volcker rule will be getting it right. I mean, I don't want financial institutions that can run to the Fed funds window borrowing money and then putting it in a trading account and essentially gambling with it.
And we don't.
But at the same time, you have to be able to hedge your positions. So I hope that we can work with the regulators as policymakers here and with the industry to craft something that makes sense. And if you have any ideas for us, I got 1 minute and 4 seconds. I'll let you tell us if you have any ideas on how to make that happen.
The only idea I have is that people should actually get in a room, talk about what we're trying to accomplish, go through the specifics, and not pretend that it's either for Volcker or against Volcker. It is, for us, it's the law of the land. You all may want to get rid of it, but we have to deal with it, and it's a very detailed thing. And I remind people, we do have the best capital markets in the world. You should go home at night and say that we sit upon the best economy of the world, the best capital markets of the world, the best job creator of the world. We need to start doing jobs again. And we need to fix the mortgage market. We need to do a lot of things. If we do it, I think we'll help this economy recover quicker, not slower.
One of the things Mr. Gensler said earlier today, that there weren't many things he said that I agreed with, but the one thing he did talk about is the advantage Europe has as being in a time zone between Asia and the U.S. And there have been a lot of questions about why certain trades go to go to London, and I know you need to follow your customers who are global too, but isn't there some advantage to that time zone?
Thank you, and Ms. Stivers, your time is up. I think the answer was yes. Maybe.
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Sky for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Dimon. Good to have you. I want to start off by paying you and your operation down in Georgia a tremendous compliment. You know, Georgia's #1 in home foreclosures. And we had a great home foreclosure event down there, and I want you to say a good word for your folks down there in Georgia, Mr. David Balo and Todd Williamson, Vanessa Mims, your Chase Home Ownership Center. Good job. We saved over 1,700